The flight from Chicago to Atlanta was packed that Thursday afternoon. The summer heat had everyone on edge even before boarding, and the cramped economy section of Flight 2187 did little to improve the mood. Among the passengers was Robert, a 42-year-old history professor returning home after an academic conference. Robert had managed to get an aisle seat, which he preferred given his tall frame. He wore a crisp white button-down shirt and navy slacks, his typical professional attire. After 2 days of presenting research and networking, he was exhausted and looking forward to getting home to his wife and 2 daughters. 3 rows ahead, flight attendant Diane was having a challenging day. At 29, she'd been with the airline for 5 years, but today tested her patience like few others. The flight had been delayed due to mechanical issues, passengers were irritable from waiting, and they were short-staffed because a colleague had called in sick. Still, Diane maintained her professional smile as she prepared the meal service cart. "Would you like chicken or pasta?" she asked each passenger, methodically working her way down the aisle. The small galley kitchen was jammed with trays, and the narrow aisle barely accommodated the service cart. Several passengers had already complained about the quality of the food or requested special meals that weren't available. Robert had been working on his laptop, putting final touches on the presentation he'd given at the conference. When Diane reached his row, he carefully closed his computer and stowed it under the seat in front of him. "Chicken, please," he said with a tired smile. "Certainly, sir," Diane replied, reaching for the tray. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds. The passenger across the aisle suddenly stood up to reach for something in the overhead bin, bumping into Diane. She lost her balance, and as she tried to steady herself, the tray with Robert's chicken meal tipped. The aluminum container of chicken and gravy, along with a cup of orange juice, tumbled directly onto Robert's lap and white shirt. "Oh my God!" Diane gasped, horrified as the orange-brown mixture spread across Robert's pristine shirt and pants. "I am so sorry." Robert jumped up instinctively, the hot gravy seeping through his clothes. Several nearby passengers turned to stare, some with phones already recording the scene, a common reflex in the age of viral videos and social media. "It's burning," Robert said, trying to pull the fabric away from his skin. The gravy wasn't scalding, but it was definitely uncomfortable. Diane quickly grabbed napkins from her cart. "Please, let me help," she said, her voice shaking slightly. She handed him a stack of thin airline napkins while calling to another flight attendant for assistance. What neither of them noticed immediately was that several passengers had begun whispering among themselves. One woman in the row behind muttered something to her husband. The couple looked uncomfortable, their eyes darting between Robert and Diane. Robert dabbed at his shirt, knowing it was ruined. "Do you have any club soda?" he asked, keeping his voice even despite his frustration. He was no stranger to keeping cool under pressure. As one of the few black professors in his department, he'd learned long ago that displaying anger, no matter how justified, often led to unfair judgments. The head flight attendant arrived with a bottle of club soda and more napkins. "Sir, I sincerely apologize for this incident. We'll file a report for your damaged clothing, and of course, we'll get you another meal right away." Robert nodded, "Thank you. Is there somewhere I could clean up a bit more thoroughly?" "The lavatory is just behind you, sir," the head attendant replied, pointing toward the back of the plane. "We'll have your seat cleaned up when you return." As Robert made his way to the bathroom, he noticed the stares. Some sympathetic, some curious, and a few that made him uncomfortably aware of his skin color. He'd experienced these looks before, the assumptions people made when tensions rose and a black man was involved. In the tiny airplane bathroom, Robert did his best to clean his shirt and pants. The gravy had left an obvious stain, and the orange juice added a sticky sweetness to the mess. He sighed, looking at his reflection in the small mirror. He'd have to change into his gym clothes from his carry-on once he returned to his seat. Meanwhile, in the cabin, rumors began to spread. Someone claimed they'd heard Robert threaten to sue the airline. Another suggested he'd been rude to Diane. None of this was true, but in the confined space of an airplane at 30,000 feet, gossip traveled faster than the plane itself. Diane was visibly upset as she continued her duties. It was an accident, she kept explaining to her colleagues. The passenger across the aisle bumped into me. And Mr. Robert was completely understanding about it. When Robert returned to his seat, now wearing a plain gray t-shirt he'd retrieved from his carry-on, he found a fresh meal waiting for him, along with a form to claim compensation for his ruined clothes. The seat had been cleaned as promised, though it was still slightly damp. "Again, I'm truly sorry about what happened," Diane said, stopping by his seat. Her eyes were sincere, perhaps even a bit teary. "These things happen," Robert replied with a small smile. "No permanent damage done." What neither Robert nor Diane realized was that a passenger several rows back had been recording the entire incident, from the initial spill to their current conversation. The video, carefully edited to show only certain moments, would be uploaded to social media before the plane even landed in Atlanta. And that video would set in motion a chain of events that neither of them could have anticipated, events that would test their character, challenge public perceptions, and ultimately reveal both the worst and best aspects of human nature in unexpected ways. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, Robert tried to focus on the book he'd brought along, but his mind kept drifting back to the incident. He'd dealt with worse, certainly, much worse. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about this situation felt off. The way certain passengers looked at him, the whispers that didn't quite stop when he walked past. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their arrival in Atlanta. Local time is 4:37 p.m., with clear skies and a temperature of 86 degrees. On behalf of the entire crew, we thank you for flying with us today. Robert gathered his belongings, carefully placing his stained shirt and pants in a plastic bag provided by the flight attendants. As passengers prepared to deplane, he noticed Diane speaking with her supervisor near the cockpit door, occasionally glancing in his direction. When the doors finally opened, Robert waited patiently for his turn to exit. As he made his way toward the front, Diane caught his eye. "Mr. Robert," she said quietly, "could I speak with you for a moment before you leave?" He nodded, stepping aside to let other passengers pass. When most of the plane had emptied, Diane approached him with the head flight attendant and a man in a suit who introduced himself as Keith, the airline's customer service manager who had been called to meet the flight. "Sir," Keith began, "I understand there was an unfortunate incident during the flight. We'd like to offer our sincere apologies." Robert nodded. "These things happen. I appreciate the concern." Keith seemed to hesitate before continuing. "There's something else you should know. It appears a video of the incident has already been posted online, and it's getting quite a bit of attention." "A video?" Robert's stomach tightened. "What kind of attention?" Diane looked uncomfortable. "The video doesn't show the whole story," she explained. "It starts after the spill and, well, the person who posted it added a caption suggesting I deliberately spilled food on you and that you were threatening me afterward." "What?" Robert felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over him. "That's completely false. You were nothing but apologetic, and I never threatened anyone." Keith nodded grimly. "We know that, sir. The flight security footage clearly shows it was an accident caused by another passenger bumping into Diane. Unfortunately, the online narrative is already taking on a life of its own." Robert pulled out his phone as soon as it reconnected to service. He had several missed calls from his wife, along with text messages asking if he was okay. When he opened his social media app, he understood why. The video, already viewed over 50,000 times, showed only the aftermath of the spill, Diane looking flustered and Robert standing with food stains on his white shirt, his expression one of controlled frustration that was being misinterpreted by viewers. The caption read, Flight attendant accidentally spills food on black passenger. Watch how he reacts. Comments flooded the post, many taking sides without knowing the full story. Some accused Robert of overreacting, while others claimed Diane had acted intentionally. Neither accusation was true, but online, perception quickly became reality. "This is ridiculous," Robert muttered, scrolling through the comments. "I never said or did any of these things they're claiming. We want you to know that the airline stands behind both of you," Keith said firmly. "We're already preparing a statement clarifying what actually happened, with Diane's full account." Diane stepped forward, her eyes meeting Robert's. "I'm so sorry this is happening. What should have been a minor accident is turning into something ugly, and it's not fair to you." As they stood in the now empty airplane, Robert realized this situation had evolved into something much bigger than a ruined shirt. By the time he walked into the terminal, his phone was ringing again, this time from a number he didn't recognize. Robert hesitated before answering the unknown number. After seeing the online reaction to the video, he was wary of who might be trying to reach him. "Hello?" he answered cautiously. "Is this Robert? The passenger from Flight 2187? The voice belonged to a woman who identified herself as Tanya, a reporter from a local Atlanta news station. "We've seen the video circulating online and wanted to get your side of the story." Robert took a deep breath. There isn't much of a story to tell. It was an accident, plain and simple. The flight attendant was bumped by another passenger while serving meals. "That's not what many viewers are saying," Tanya pressed. "Would you be willing to do an interview with us this evening?" "I appreciate your interest, but no," Robert replied firmly. "There's been enough misunderstanding already." As he ended the call, Robert spotted Keith and Diane approaching with another man who introduced himself as the airline's regional director. "Mr. Robert, we've been monitoring the situation," the director said, his expression grave. "The video has now been viewed over 200,000 times in just the past hour. We'd like to offer you a private room where we can discuss how to handle this." In a quiet conference room near the airline's customer service desk, Robert called his wife, Pamela, to let her know what was happening. As a communications professional, her advice was clear. "Don't engage with social media directly," she cautioned. "Let the airline handle the official response, but be prepared. These things can spiral quickly." The airline officials proposed issuing a joint statement with Robert and Diane, clarifying the actual events. They also offered Robert compensation for his ruined clothing, additional flight vouchers, and an upgrade to first class on his next trip. "I don't need all that," Robert said. "I just want people to know the truth. Diane doesn't deserve to have her reputation damaged because of something that wasn't her fault." Diane, who had been quiet during much of the discussion, looked up in surprise. "You're worried about my reputation?" "I'm more concerned about what people are saying about you. Some of the comments are so unfair and, well, racist." Robert nodded grimly. "That's unfortunately not new to me. But now it affects both of us." As they discussed strategy, Robert's phone buzzed with a text from a former student. "Prof, is this you in this video? People are going crazy about it, and someone just doxed you. Your home address and university info are being shared online." The room fell silent as Robert showed them the message. The situation was escalating faster than any of them had anticipated. "We need to act now," the regional director said, immediately making a call to the airline security team. "This has become a safety concern." Outside the conference room, the normal bustle of the airport continued, passengers rushing to gates, families reuniting, workers going about their routines. None of them aware that just behind a nondescript door, Robert and Diane were about to make a decision that would change both their lives and challenge the perceptions of thousands of strangers who thought they knew what had happened on that flight. Within 30 minutes, the airline security team arrived with troubling news. The video had now reached over 500,000 views. Hateful comments targeted both Robert and Diane, with some viewers taking extreme positions without knowing the facts. "We've arranged for security escorts for both of you," the head of security explained. "And we recommend you both stay at a hotel tonight rather than going home, at least until things calm down." Robert thought of his wife and daughters waiting at home. "I need to get my family somewhere safe too," he said. Diane looked pale. "I can't believe this is happening over an accident. I've never experienced anything like this." As they discussed logistics, Robert's phone rang again. This time, it was Dr. Henderson, the dean of his university. "Robert, I've just been contacted by several media outlets about a video involving you," Dr. Henderson said. "The university is getting flooded with calls and emails." "It's completely misleading," Robert explained, detailing the actual events. "The airline has the full footage showing it was just an accident." "I believe you," the dean assured him. "But I need to know, would you be willing to address this publicly? The university wants to support you, but we need to be proactive." While Robert spoke with his dean, Diane received her own disturbing call. A colleague informed her that people online had identified the airline and her full name. Someone had even created a hashtag calling for her firing. "This is insane," she whispered, hands shaking as she ended the call. The regional director, who had been making numerous calls, suddenly stood up. "I have an idea," he announced. "But it would require both of you to be on board." His plan was bold. Instead of hiding, they would face the situation head-on. The airline had obtained the full security camera footage from the cabin showing the entire incident, including the passenger who bumped into Diane. They would release this footage, with Robert and Diane appearing together in a brief statement. "The truth is our best defense here," the director said. "People are creating narratives because they only have partial information." Robert and Diane exchanged looks. Both were hesitant about putting themselves further into the public eye, but the alternative, letting misinformation spread unchecked, seemed worse. "Let's do it," Robert decided. "But we need to be careful about the message. This isn't just about clearing our names. There's a bigger issue here about rush to judgment and the damage it causes." Diane nodded in agreement. "I want to do this. People need to see what really happened." As arrangements were being made for their joint statement, Robert received a text from his wife. She'd arrived at the airport with their daughters, escorted by university security. Seeing his family walk into the conference room, his wife's determined expression, his daughters' confused faces, strengthened his resolve. "Before we do this," Robert said to everyone in the room, "I want to be clear about one thing. I'm not interested in blaming anyone. Not Diane, not the passenger who bumped her, not even the person who posted that video. What I want is for people to learn from this." Within 2 hours, a makeshift press area had been set up in a conference room at the airport. Several local news outlets had assembled, and the airline's communications team was managing a live stream for social media. The goal was simple: show the truth and let people judge for themselves. Robert stood with his family to one side, going over talking points with the airline's PR representative. Diane sat nearby with her supervisor, looking nervous but determined. "You don't have to do this," Robert told her. "I can speak alone if you'd prefer." Diane shook her head. "We're in this together. That's the whole point, isn't it?" The airline's regional director opened the press conference with a brief statement about the incident and introduced Robert and Diane. As cameras turned to them, Robert stepped forward first. "My name is Robert Thompson. I'm a history professor, a husband, and a father of 2 girls. Earlier today, I was a passenger on Flight 2187 when a simple accident occurred, the kind that happens every day in our busy, crowded world." He spoke calmly, recounting how the passenger had bumped into Diane, causing the spill. What should have remained a minor incident has somehow become something much bigger, fueled by a selectively edited video and people's rush to judgment. Diane spoke next, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've been a flight attendant for 5 years, and I've seen how tight spaces and travel stress can lead to accidents. What I experienced today, though, was something new, seeing how quickly people can build a false narrative and the real harm it can cause." The regional director then played the full security footage on a large screen. Unlike the viral clip, it clearly showed the entire sequence, the other passenger standing suddenly, bumping into Diane, and the spill that followed. It also captured Robert and Diane's actual interaction afterward, respectful and understanding on both sides. As the footage ended, Robert addressed the cameras again. "I'm not here to blame anyone. Not Diane, not the airline, not even the person who posted that misleading video. But I do want to highlight something important: the speed with which we now condemn people without facts is dangerous." He continued, "Before today, Diane and I were strangers. Now we're connected by this experience. What happened to us could happen to anyone, being judged and threatened based on a moment taken out of context." What happened next surprised everyone in the room. Patricia, the passenger who had bumped into Diane, stepped forward from the small crowd. "I need to say something," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm the one who caused the accident. When I saw that video going viral, I felt terrible. I should have spoken up sooner." The room fell silent as Patricia approached Robert and Diane. "I'm so sorry," she said to both of them. "I had my headphones on and wasn't paying attention when I stood up suddenly. When I saw what was happening online, I knew I had to come forward." Robert extended his hand to Patricia. As they shook hands, camera flashes filled the room, capturing a moment of unexpected reconciliation that would soon tell a very different story online. The image of Robert, Diane, and Patricia standing together quickly began to replace the misleading viral video online. The airline's social media team made sure the full footage and press conference were shared widely, with a simple caption: "The full story matters." By evening, the narrative was shifting. News outlets that had initially reported on the confrontation were now covering the story of 3 strangers brought together by an accident and social media misunderstanding. Hashtags calling for Diane's firing were being drowned out by new ones praising the 3 for their honesty and grace under pressure. After the press conference, Robert finally had a moment alone with his family in a private lounge the airline had provided. His younger daughter climbed into his lap while his wife showed him the latest social media updates on her phone. "It's turning around," Pamela said, scrolling through comments. "People are actually apologizing for jumping to conclusions." Robert nodded, though he knew better than to expect a complete resolution. The internet has a short memory. Something new will capture everyone's attention tomorrow. In another part of the airport, Diane sat with Patricia, sharing a much-needed cup of coffee. The 2 women had formed an unexpected bond through the ordeal. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't come forward," Diane said. Patricia shook her head. "I almost didn't. I was scared and embarrassed. But then I thought about what you and Robert might be going through because of something I caused." "You did the right thing," Diane assured her. "Not everyone would have had that courage." Meanwhile, the airline executives were meeting to discuss next steps. What had begun as a potential PR disaster was evolving into something more meaningful. The regional director proposed launching a company-wide initiative focused on responsible social media use and the importance of context in the digital age. "We can turn this incident into something positive," he suggested. A teaching moment. Back in the lounge, Robert received a call from his university dean again. "I've been watching the press conference," Dr. Henderson said. "The way you handled this situation was remarkable. Several of our communications professors are interested in using this as a case study, with your permission of course." Robert hadn't considered the educational potential of what they'd experienced. "Actually, I think that's a great idea. It fits perfectly with a course I've been wanting to develop on media literacy and critical thinking in the digital age." As evening fell, the three main figures in the day's events, Robert, Diane, and Patricia, gathered one last time before going their separate ways. The airline had arranged hotel accommodations for each of them as a precaution, though the online backlash had largely subsided. "I never expected my day to turn out like this," Diane admitted. "When that food spilled this morning, I thought the worst part would be filing paperwork and apologizing to a passenger. And I thought my biggest problem would be giving a presentation with a stained shirt," Robert added with a small smile. Patricia looked at them both. "Do you think people will learn anything from what happened to us?" The question hung in the air between them as they considered the day's events and what would follow. The next morning, Robert woke up to his phone buzzing with notifications. The story had gone national overnight. Major news networks were featuring segments about how a simple airline accident had turned into a lesson on social media responsibility and rushing to judgment. He scrolled through his messages, pausing at one from a producer at a popular morning talk show requesting an interview with him, Diane, and Patricia together. Several similar requests had come in from other media outlets. Over breakfast with his family in the hotel restaurant, Robert discussed these opportunities with Pamela. "I think we should do just one, major interview," Pamela suggested. "Say what needs to be said, then step back and let the story fade naturally." Robert agreed. "I'll reach out to Diane and Patricia to see how they feel." Across town, Diane was having a similar conversation with her mother on the phone. "Everyone at church is talking about you," her mother said. "Pastor even mentioned it, said he was proud of how you handled yourself." Diane smiled, feeling a weight lifting. "It's strange, Mom. Yesterday was one of the worst days of my life, and somehow it's turning into something meaningful. That's how life works sometimes, baby. The hardest moments can lead to the most important ones." Meanwhile, the original video poster had issued a public apology after facing intense criticism for sharing the edited clip without context. Their statement acknowledged the harm caused and pledged to be more responsible in the future. By midday, Robert, Diane, and Patricia had agreed to do a single interview with a respected journalist known for thoughtful coverage of social issues. They met at the network's Atlanta studio, where they were welcomed warmly by the production team. During a break before filming, the three sat together in the green room, still processing the strange turn of events that had brought them together. "My daughter's teacher used our story in class this morning," Patricia said, shaking her head in disbelief. "They talked about digital citizenship and fact-checking before sharing content online." "Already?" Robert was surprised. "That was fast." Diane nodded. "The airline told me they've received hundreds of messages from people sharing similar experiences of being misjudged based on out-of-context social media posts." As they prepared for the interview, the journalist joined them briefly to outline her approach. "I don't want to sensationalize what happened," she explained. "I'm more interested in what we can all learn from your experience." "That's exactly what we want too," Robert responded. The interview itself was straightforward and thoughtful. Each person shared their perspective on the events, from the initial accident to the online firestorm that followed. They discussed the fear they'd felt when targeted by online hate, the relief when the truth emerged, and their hopes for how people might think twice before jumping to conclusions in the future. When the journalist asked what they would say to the millions who had seen the misleading video, Patricia leaned forward. "Check your facts," she said simply. "Wait for the whole story. Remember there are real people behind every viral moment." Robert nodded in agreement, adding, "And remember that sometimes, the most shocking thing that can happen is that people come together instead of being torn apart." 1 week after the incident, life had begun returning to normal. Robert was back in his classroom, though students occasionally asked about his famous experience. He used these moments as impromptu lessons about media literacy, something he was now incorporating formally into his courses. Diane had returned to work, supported by colleagues who had rallied around her. The airline had even featured her in an internal newsletter highlighting employees who exemplified professionalism under pressure. Far from being fired as internet trolls had demanded, she was being recognized for her grace in a difficult situation. Patricia had perhaps undergone the most significant change. Inspired by her role in setting the record straight, she had started volunteering with a digital literacy program for seniors in her community, helping them understand how to identify misleading content online. The three stayed in touch through a group chat, sharing updates and occasionally marveling at how a spilled meal had connected them. "Just got stopped at the grocery store again," Diane messaged one evening. "A woman thanked me for standing up to internet bullies. I didn't have the heart to tell her I mostly just cried in an airport conference room." "At least you're famous for something positive," Robert replied. "My students now call me Professor Food Fight behind my back. I pretend not to hear it." Patricia added, "My son said his friends think I'm cool now. First time that's ever happened." Beyond their personal experiences, the incident had sparked genuine conversation. Several major social media platforms had cited the case in announcements about new features designed to provide more context for viral content and reduce the spread of misleading clips. The airline had followed through on its promise to develop a company initiative. They launched a campaign called The Full Picture, training staff on managing social media incidents and creating passenger materials about responsible online behavior. Roberts University had invited all three to speak at a special symposium on digital citizenship in an age of viral content. The event had drawn interest from educators, media specialists, and ethics researchers from across the country. On a personal level, Robert's relationship with his daughters had deepened through conversations about what had happened. His older daughter, initially embarrassed by the attention, had come to see her father in a new light. "Dad," she said one evening as they walked their dog, "my teacher said what you did was really brave. Standing up like that when everyone was saying bad things." Robert considered this. "I don't know if it was brave. It just seemed like the right thing to do." "That's what bravery is sometimes," she replied with teenage wisdom. "Doing the right thing when it's hard." As autumn arrived, the incident that had once dominated headlines became yesterday's news. But its impact lingered in quiet, meaningful ways, in classrooms discussing media literacy, in training programs for airline staff, in families talking about online responsibility, and in the unlikely friendship that had formed between three people who might otherwise never have met. Sometimes, Robert reflected, the most shocking thing about a viral moment isn't the incident itself, but the unexpected good that can come from it. 6 months after the incident, Robert received an unexpected email. A documentary filmmaker wanted to feature their story in a project about digital media's impact on society. After consulting with Diane and Patricia, they agreed to participate. On a crisp spring morning, the three reunited at the same airport where it had all begun. As cameras rolled, they walked through the terminal, recounting their experiences. "It feels strange being back here," Diane admitted. "So much has changed since that day." Indeed, much had changed. Robert had been promoted to department chair and was now leading a university-wide initiative on digital ethics. Diane had been selected to help develop the airline's new training program on crisis management. Patricia had expanded her volunteer work and was considering a career change into education. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just stayed in my seat that day," Patricia mused as they passed the gate where their flight had arrived. "Or if I'd been more careful with the serving cart," Diane added. Robert shook his head. "I think about that too. But it's not the accident that made the difference, it was how we all responded afterward." For the documentary, they returned to the conference room where they had held their press conference. Now it seemed smaller, more ordinary than in their memories. The filmmaker asked each of them to reflect on the long-term impact of their experience. Diane spoke about learning to stand up for herself while staying compassionate. Patricia discussed finding courage she didn't know she had. Robert talked about seeing firsthand how history, even personal history, can be distorted by who controls the narrative. The most valuable lesson for me, Robert said, was seeing how quickly people divide into us versus them, but also how that can be overcome when we make the effort to see the whole picture. The documentary aired later that year to critical acclaim. Schools incorporated it into media studies curricula, and it sparked renewed conversations about the responsibilities that come with the phones we carry and the content we share. On the one-year anniversary of the incident, the three friends met for dinner with their families. Over dessert, they raised glasses in a toast. To spilled food, Diane said with a laugh. To speaking up, added Patricia. To the unlikely good that can come from difficult moments, Robert concluded. As they left the restaurant, a teenager approached them tentatively. "Excuse me," she said, "aren't you the people from that airplane video? We studied your case in school." They exchanged glances, still surprised at being recognized. "That's us," Robert confirmed. "I just wanted to say thanks," the girl continued. "After learning about what happened to you, I stopped and thought twice before sharing something online. You probably get this all the time, but I think what you did was important." As they watched her walk away, Patricia summed up what they were all feeling. That right there, that's why it was all worth it. What had begun with a simple accident had resulted in meaningful connections and real change. The viral moment that could have defined them in the worst way possible had instead revealed the best of who they were and what people could be when they chose understanding over judgment. And that, perhaps, was the most shocking outcome of all.